So let us continue with our lesson, and the next step is to work with our update. So we need to update our tax entity locally and also update our API. So for that, let me go to the repository and let us select the edit tax repository. And the first thing is that we need to add a support for our app database. So private val app database, we need it. And okay, so after we have the app database over here, I'll create a suspend function over here, suspend function of the update and update tax. So update tax, and let us call this particular function, and I will call it app database, or I can directly say return it. So app database dot tax down the update, and when we want to update we have to pass the tax entity. So let's go over here and I will pass the tax entity, and let me pass the tax entity over here. Okay, so we have this suspend function that will take the parameter as a tax entity, and we'll call the app database tax down update and pass that entity. And the next step is to go and work with our edit tax view model. So in the view model, what we need to do is after we update it in our remote server or the API. So this is going to update it in the API. And after we have a success response code, which is of 201, we need to call that particular function to update it. So what we will do now is let us fix the first thing over here, that we have to pass the room database instance. So that should be of the app database that get instance, and I'll pass the application, and that will get the database instance for us. And the next step is I will create a private function over here, which should be of the update tax. And this update tax, what we need to do is let me create a try catch block over here first of all, and I will say error and of the exception. Okay, and finally we will log that exception. Just copy this and paste it over here and replace this one. And inside this we will create a coroutine scope, and that should be of the dispatcher.io. Just do it in the IO, and let us launch this particular coroutine scope. And what we will do now is after we have this one, I will just say we need to update it our database. So I will say edit tax repository dot update the tax, right? So we need to update the tax, and we need to pass the tax entity. So for here, what we need is after from here, what we are getting is we are getting the edit tax response. So if we go over here, edit tax response, so we are getting this back from the server. And what I will do is I will say over here that the edit tax response we are getting from the server, and over here we need to create a tax entity, right? And when we create a tax entity, now we have an edit tax response. Just copy this one and paste it, edit tax response. So let us update it so we need to create a tax entity. So let's say ID. So we will use a name argument. ID is equals to, I will say the ID. So ID is over here. So this is the ID that we are actually passing, right? So here we are passing the ID that which is basically the entity, our local DB ID. So we don't have to pass this one. So that may be different than our remote API, the tax ID. So we have to pass the tax ID over here. So I will create a val, and I'll say our tax ID over here, and that should be of this particular mutable live data of a string. So I need to pass this one there. So just copy this one, and I need to pass that particular tax ID, not the ID. So ID is our local DB ID because we have replaced it with our local DB ID. So we pass the tax ID over here, and I hope you guys got it what I'm actually doing over here. The tax ID we need to pass to our API, because API knows only the tax ID, and it may be different. The tax ID that or our local DB ID may be different compared to the remote tax ID. So that's why we will pass the actual tax ID over here that we are storing when we got from the server. So that is the purpose over here. So we have that one, and now over here ID, I will pass this ID. So this is the ID that we need. So what we will do over here is I will just say ID dot value, and that should not be of the null, right? And next is what we need is we need the tax ID too. So tax ID I can get from the edit tax response. So dot to int, because we need to pass it as a long over here, and another one is of the tax ID, which is of int. So I will just say as a edit tax response dot the ID, right? And what we will do is another one is the body, so we need to pass the body. So body is equals to edit tax response dot body, and after body we have, first of all I think we need to pass the title. The sequence doesn't matter, but let us, whenever we are using a name argument, the sequence doesn't matter, but it's better we do it in a sequence. So tax ID and title body, and what we have to update is the status user ID. Okay, so status, which is of equals to edit tax response dot, we have the status, and we don't have the color, right? So color is we are storing locally, so I think we have somewhere over here stored. Have we stored that color? Okay, so we have not stored that color. Okay, so I think we need to remove that color. So later I think we will remove that color first. Then we have the after status, we have the user ID. So let us update the user ID. It should be of the edit tax response dot the user ID, and we have after user ID we need a created ad and updated ad. So let us, I think we remove the busy color, because busy color we are just updating it from the status, right? So I think we will remove that one, and we'll just make use of the, okay, so created ad and updated ad. So created ad, which is of, and edit tax response dot created ad, and finally we have the updated ad, which is of edit tax response dot updated ad. So finally that should be the one that we need. And what we will do is we will remove this one. So let me remove the busy color. We don't need it because busy color is based on the tax status. And okay, so user ID require int. So user ID dot to int, we need to pass it the integer value. So that is update, and we should update it, and here this will update our database, right? And when we update that particular record ID, we should get the integer value. So over here I can just say that well, the ID is of equals to, so this will get the how many record that we have updated. So here if I can check if ID is greater than 0. So if the ID is greater than 0, which means that it was successfully updated, then I can just log that one particularly, just copy this one and paste it over here, and I will just say ID dot to string. And also I think let me make use of this one, which is a succ as success, and we can just say update success, and I will just pass this ID over here, and ID, just remove this section. Okay, so we say update success, and we just pass this particular row ID, how many ID was updated. If it was success, which means that we get the ID by, or the, if you go to down, we have this one particularly returning the integer value of how many row was affected by that particular update. Okay, so we have this one, and next thing is to update, call this update. So let's do it in the next lecture. Till then, have a great day.